Welcome back to Financial Clarity for Doctors, everyone. I am Rachelle Vanderzanden, and I am here with my co-host, Corey Janoff.
Hey yo.
Whoop, whoop. Okay, so lots of clients want to talk about their student loans nowadays for very obvious reasons. With any new presidential administration, there's always a new policy agenda, there's new priorities. Under President Biden, one main part of the agenda was to ease the burden of student loans for federal borrowers, and he did a lot of work to try to change some policies through the Department of Education and things like that to make that happen. Under President Trump, a very different agenda. A huge part of it is just to cut costs across the board, including within the Department of Education. And I think a lot of people are wondering how this may affect federal student loans, especially borrowers or people who are in school, all of those kinds of things. Um, you know, I think the big question is it still worth it to pursue public service loan forgiveness if that's the thing I've been doing or the thing I've been planning on doing? And as always, in financial planning, it depends. But today we're going to do our best to give you as much information as possible on kind of some historical context behind PSLF, current policies, and also just, you're going to have to think a lot about your own student loans and your own situation. And then that context hopefully can help you make a good decision because really, we can't make decisions in a vacuum. More information is a good thing. So that will be the focus today.
Yeah, as always, it depends.
It depends.
And who knows, by the time this episode publishes, there may be some big announcement on the future of PSLF or Save Plan or
I don't think
whatever.
so.
Highly unlikely,
Mm-mm.
but
Nope.
TBD. Anyways, let's do a little history lesson here. So the basics of PSLF. So public service loan forgiveness. The whole idea here is you work for 10 years in a career that's public service related. And then they'll forgive your remaining loan balance. Now, some qualifications that you must meet to be eligible for this. You must work full time in a qualifying employer, which is either a nonprofit entity or governmental entity. Now, believe it or not, most hospitals are considered nonprofits, which you've probably seen some headlines of Trump possibly trying to change that. But that's a whole other story to unpack. But yeah, so pretty much any of you who work for a university hospital or just another hospital system, odds are your employer is a nonprofit entity and you're potentially qualifying for PSLF if you choose to fulfill the other requirements, which is, I think I mentioned, but working full time, which I think is, what is it, minimum 30 hours a week or 32 hours a week?
I think it's 30 hours per week, but also your employer has to certify that you're working full time. So whatever their
Correct.
equivalent is, it's really
Yeah.
like, will HR sign off on it?
Yeah. So if your employer, if 30 hours a week is zero point 0.6 FTE, you're probably not eligible. But, if they're willing
Yeah.
to sign the form saying, oh yeah, you're full time. So it's a
For the
little,
purpose of this. Yeah.
little vague, but,
Yep.
but yeah, as long as the employer signs off, you're good to go.
And I
Uh,
have had clients kind of fight against that too. For people who, like, for example, I had a client who was working PRN, but he was working a ton of hours and he was basically working full time. And his hospital wouldn't certify his employment, even though he met that hour requirement. So he was able to put in the work with the Department of Education or his loan servicer to certify that he was working like the equivalent of full time. So anyway, it can kind of
there we
go
go.
both ways too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You must be on one of the income driven payment plans or the standard 10-year payment plan. You got to recertify that income annually. It's been a little bit of a mess since COVID. I think this year is when they're finally starting to recertify, I think at the earliest September of this year. So again, to be determined, that can might get kicked down the road further, but potentially towards the end of 2025 or 2026 sometime, you'll need to recertify that income. So as many of you haven't had to prove your income for a while, and a lot of you are still paying that residency-based payment of a couple $100 a month,
Or
um,
less.
or zero if you're on the save plan,
Mm-hmm.
which we'll get into in a little bit. But you have to make 120 qualifying monthly payments. So 10 years, 120 months. You can't pay ahead. You can't double up and get there faster. You got to fulfill the full 10 years. It doesn't have to be consecutive, but just a total of 120. And like we mentioned, pretty much all residency and fellowship programs count as qualifying employers, and you're most likely working more than full time as a resident or fellow. So for many of you, if you get started day one of residency, you have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years
7.
potentially of
Yeah.
payments under your belt at a relatively low income. So really, the longer you're in training, the less big kid payments you'll have to make as an attending, and therefore PSLF looks more appealing to you. But if you're doing like a 3 year residency and then going into practice and you're in an area that you can make good money and you have a low student loan balance, might not be as advantageous, but we'll get into some of that as well here soon.
hmm Yep. I do think a little historical context here is helpful, just to put maybe some doubts at ease. Who knows? But PSLF was established in 2007 by Congress through the College Cost Reduction Access Act, and that was under President George W. Bush, a Republican, so that happened. It cannot be like we can't end that program without congressional approval. So this is not something that is just administrative in nature. It was passed by law. If we want to eliminate the program, that also has to be done by law through Congress. So it can't just disappear and like go away. There are lots of administrative changes that have happened frequently through the Department of Education throughout the years, including like changing payment plans that were available, changing like the calculation of those payments, whether forbearance and or deferment periods could potentially be counted towards your 120 payments. All sorts of things have changed, like kind of on the margins with the program, but the program itself has not gone away and come back or anything like that. In President Trump's first term in office, he did propose to end this program repeatedly every year. And in those proposals, even in his proposals that he wrote, it was always proposed that the end of the program would be only for new borrowers. So not people who were already enrolled in the program and working towards PSLF at that time. So even like that was the worst case scenario back then. I mean, potentially the worst case scenario right now could be a little bit worse, but that never even passed. So he proposed to end it only for new borrowers. That never even passed. So PSLF remained. During COVID, payments were paused for everyone, but payments were still counting towards PSLF. So if you, like, even though you weren't actually making payments, you're placed in this forbearance. If you continued to work for a qualifying employer, you could certify employment and have all of those months counted. And then when President Biden took office, a big goal was relieving the student loan debt burden. That was a big part of the agenda. So through the Department of Education, there were lots of changes, but one of the big ones is that they created a new lower payment plan based on income that was called SAVE, I guess. And that also allowed for things like buying back payments from periods of time that you didn't get counted because you were in deferment or forbearance and didn't really understand that maybe you could have been making low payments or something like that. So some of those changes were challenged in court, the SAVE plan being the big one. So that has kind of been the drama lately. It's like SAVE plan, people were moved to that payment plan and now are being told like this isn't actually legal. Now how do we fix it? So under the new presidential administration with President Trump, lots of like dramatic headlines across the board, obviously, but one of them is a proposal to get rid of the Department of Education. That doesn't mean student loans are gone. Like, that would be a good thing for you if that happened and they just wiped out student loans. But that's not what's going to happen. Like, if that happened, it would be like move them to the Treasury Department, like sell them off to private lenders, like all of those kinds of things. So, it's understandable that people are a little bit concerned just because of everything that's been in the news and just a lot of uncertainty about like how payments are going to be calculated and what should we do next. But it would be difficult and challenging to just rip this program out from underneath people completely. Like it's not that that's impossible, but it is highly improbable. Like it's very unlikely that that would happen. Again, not impossible, definitely unlikely.
Yes. Some more on the save plan drama, which many of you are caught up in. So, if you're on Repay back in the day when Repay was a thing 2 years ago plus, which was a newer plan that was created like 5, 6, 7 years ago. I can't remember. But anyways,
I don't know.
if you're on Repay, you're automatically moved into Save. If you're on one of the other plans, you have the option to change over to Save. A lot of people did elect to go into the Save payment plan because it resulted in a smaller minimum required monthly payment. There's some other perks associated with
And
it.
there was an interest subsidy, which is a huge deal.
Yep, interest subsidy.
Yeah.
You could do the buyback if you were in deferment or forbearance for a period of time. But long story short, everyone in Save after like 8 months was told because some court somewhere said, unconstitutional. So they froze the Save plan. Everyone was frozen in it and couldn't get out of it until like last month, I think. Um, and even then, you got to jump through some rings of fire to do that, walk over hot coals, etc. But but yeah, the save plan, you were put into forbearance. You weren't paying interest or aren't paying interest, and if you're still in it, no payments, no interest. It's just kind of frozen in time, which is cool. It's not accruing interest. You don't have to make payments. Definitely helpful for your monthly cash flow, but you're not getting anything counted towards PSLF at this point, which is frustrating for those of you trying to pursue PSLF. It's just delaying the amount of time you have to keep your student loans until you can potentially get them forgiven. Eventually, it'll probably get sorted out uh, one day. Who knows when? I'm not going to put a time stamp on it or an over under. Go look at Poly Market, see what the odds are of a date. You could probably bet on it if you really want to.
The
Um,
news says like no sooner than September 2025. Like that's the only thing we know, which is not anything. It's like your payments aren't going to turn back on and this is not going to be fixed before September. When is it going to be fixed after that? Who knows? Who knows? Yeah.
so, anyways, back to the whole gist of this, or whole purpose of this podcast.
Yeah.
Is PSLF still worth it? It's become a little bit not super restrictive, but a little bit more restrictive. There's a lot of question marks surrounding it. Is it going to be a thing in the future? Is my employer going to qualify? Um, Save plan, what's the deal here? Like, should I even pursue this anymore? And as always, it depends.
It
Right, Rochelle?
depends. Yeah, absolutely. We're going to talk a little bit in a second about like what to do if you are stuck in this save plan drama. But I think in general, like, is it still worth it? If it was worth it for you before all of this drama, it's probably still worth it. But just like with anything, you can look at your personal risk tolerance to help you decide. Like knowing all of this information, knowing that like they could potentially through Congress eliminate the program. It's really unlikely they'd pull it out from existing borrowers. Obviously there's been a lot of drama. Like it really makes sense to look at your personal financial situation when making these decisions. So take a look at that and ask yourself a few questions like, are you working for a qualifying employer? That's probably the most important one. If you're in training, probably, are you going to work for a qualifying employer as an attending? If you want to, and that's like the plan, then it probably makes sense to try to do this at least. Do you think that you're going to work for a qualifying employer for at least 10 years? If so, probably makes sense to try it out. And the other thing is like, even if you start by working towards PSLF, it doesn't mean you have to do it. You can change your mind. And especially when you're in training and things like that, and you can't make super high payments anyway, it's probably the best bet just to like start working towards that program, get some payments under your belt. And then beyond that, how many years do you have left? So if you're looking at your personal situation and you're 7 years in and you have 7 years paint like counted as of when things went into pause last year and now maybe you're not counting payments anymore, but you only have 3 years left. Okay, well, it's not too long, but is it making it more challenging for you to do the job that you want to do because you're just sitting around and waiting? Like, that's obviously not fun either. So then you want to look at things like, how financially important is this to me? Like, what is your student loan balance? If it's $100,000, that's very different than if it's $400,000. Like, if we are potentially going to have $350,000 of loans forgiven, that's a huge deal. So the larger your student loan balance, the more attractive a program like PSLF is because it's going to save you a lot more money just because there is a lot more money in those loans to begin with. The other thing is like looking at your income. So if you have a high expected income and a relatively low student loan balance, meaning that your payments when they calculate that income driven payment will be a really high portion of your loans, it may not make sense to pursue it. But if you have a relatively high student loan balance, but your expected income is not huge, then it probably does make sense to look into it. And we can talk about a couple of examples really quickly. But if you're a primary care doctor, and let's just say, as an example, you could make $220,000 a year starting at a hospital with some expected increases in pay over time. Maybe you could make $250,000 in a starting practice or like at a private practice, and it would go up over a while. Like if your loan balance is 300,000 and you have 6 years left, it's still probably worth it to pursue PSLF because yes, you could potentially make more in that private practice, but not enough more that it is going to offset like how much you can have forgiven in your student loans. Like always, finances are not the only thing to think about here. Like what job you want to do long term is a very important part of this thing too. But the bigger those numbers are, the bigger impact they have on your decision making. If you are a specialist, on the other hand, and you can work at a hospital and make $300,000, potentially, a qualifying nonprofit, um, and then, you could make 400 or $500,000 by year 4 or 5. Or you could work in private practice starting at $50,000 more, maybe $350,000. But then like that can increase a lot with RVU production potentially. Maybe it's 600 or $800,000. Potentially you can make twice as much in private practice as you can working for a qualifying nonprofit. And then if you only have a $150,000 loan balance with 5 years remaining, like that 30K that you could put towards the loans each year just to pay them off is way less than you could earn in additional income. So that additional income like more than offsets like what you could potentially have forgiven in your student loans. So and those are all things that we wanted to think about even before all of this drama. Like it's not really about that, although that is something that we want to understand and know, but your personal financial situation is has a much bigger impact on whether this is worth it or not.
Yeah, every case is different.
Hmm.
You might make more money working at a hospital as a specialist than at a
Yeah.
private group. Like I have some clients, they're maybe not in well, some are in a big city, some are in smaller areas, but making a like 7 figures per year because their hospital just needs their specialty
Hmm.
and they're getting paid accordingly. Whereas if they went to a private group, it'd be a little bit more of a gamble, or maybe just the nature of what they do and the procedures. They pretty much have to be at a hospital. There's not
Hmm.
really many options for a private group. Um, case by case. Obviously the typical scenario is if you're employed, you're going to have less income earning potential than if you're in a private practice because you're a business owner, but not guaranteed. More risk, more reward. You got to take on those business ownership responsibilities, and maybe not. Maybe someone else in the practice or some other partners or handle all that aspect of it. Um, but you have more upside potential, but there's also no guaranteed floor. If the practice isn't making money, you can't get paid as much. You got to pay your employees, pay the overhead costs. So some of that's on you.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas, you don't have the administrative side of things to deal with. You don't have the business owner headaches to deal with at a hospital or university. You just get paid a salary to show up and do your job, and there's still going to be headaches, absolutely.
Hmm.
But the onus is more so on the employer to make sure that they can afford to pay you, keep things running smoothly, get patients in the door, etc. Um, so yeah, case by case, every circumstance is different with everything. But
Hmm.
but anyways, so next steps. What should you do if you're on the save plan and in forbearance? Take a look at your options carefully. If you just stay in forbearance on save, you're like, I kind of like this. I'm not making any payments and I can spend more money on things. You're just delaying the inevitable of ultimately having to make payments and eventually pursue PSLF. You're not accruing credits at the moment, so you're going to eventually have to pay that off at some point. And maybe your income is increased too, so your required monthly payment would be higher when you eventually have to recertify. Now, one big benefit of the SAVE plan is that buyback. So even if you're in forbearance, once you've reached 120 months of employment at a qualifying institution, you can apply to have your loans forgiven and buy back those missed payments during forbearance in one lump sum. So let's say your payment should have been, make the math simple, $1,000 per month, and you have 20 months that were in forbearance. Okay, you have to pay $20,000 to get your loans forgiven now that you've reached 120 months of employment. So save up some cash. Once you hit your
Hmm.
120-month mark, apply for forgiveness and pay the missed payments back, and you're all set.
Yeah.
So for those
One
of
thing just
you,
to clarify, Corey, like the buyback program isn't part of SAVE. It was just like a different administrative policy. So even if you change your payment plan and you're in a different payment plan, you can still apply to like buy back these payments that you've missed over the last few months. Uh, If that program is still around when you reach 120 payments. And that's the big if, because that was again one of those administrative changes that happened through the Department of Education, which means it can be changed again. It was not part of the original law. So, yes, President Biden put that in place so people could go back and buy periods of forbearance, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be there when you reach 120 payments. And you can't buy back until you get to that goalpost, basically.
correct, yeah, you have to reach 120 before you're eligible for the buyback. So
Yeah.
long story short, for those of you that are pretty close to the finish line, you're like in the one teens and you only have a handful of months to go before you get to 120. Probably worth just sitting tight and save and then applying for forgiveness and doing that buyback. Now, if you're still a handful of years away from PSLF or you're still in residency, it might be worth considering changing to one of those income based, well, the only income based repayment plan, IBR, that you can hop onto. I think, what is
You
it,
can hop on to pay as
ICR?
you earn also still.
Oh, really? They opened that one
They
back up.
reopened it.
Okay.
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
whichever plan makes the most sense for you,
Hmm.
hop onto that one, get those payments back going. Especially like if you're early on, you're still in training, you'd rather make payments at $200 or $300 a month as a trainee than payments at 2 or 3 thousand a month as an attending. So
Yeah.
get on that train sooner rather than later, so you can get those payments counting again towards the 120 that you need to make.
One
Um,
thing I was thinking, Corey, and I've never actually thought about this before, which is interesting, but if you're not going to do public service loan forgiveness and you are on the SAVE plan and you're in training and your interest is paused, you should probably just stay on SAVE.
Sit tight. Yeah,
Yeah,
zero
because it's
interest.
saving, yeah, it's saving you so much money and interest, which is really the most valuable thing for you right now if your plan longer term is to pay back your loans. Yeah, we don't want interest. We don't like that. Mm-mm.
Yeah, if you have no intention of doing PSLF, you've already got a private practice job lined up and you're going to make boatloads of money and just be able to pay them off within your first couple years as an attending, then yeah,
Hmm.
sit tight, wait till the boatloads of money come in, and then just
Yep.
pay off your student loans the old fashioned way, be done with them.
Yep. I do have some attendings that are on Save, and I'm telling them the same thing. Like, hey, like you can still make payments. You're just not accruing interest. So
It's
yeah.
fantastic. It's like a 0% interest rate credit card
Yeah. It's not going to count
or
towards
loan,
PSLF,
but
but you can still pay on the principal. For,
you're
yeah.
not eligible for PSLF in this
Yeah, it
example.
doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. I think so. Those are like the two main options with Save. You can stick it out, see what happens. When payments do resume, they'll use whatever income information they already have on file. So that means your payment will probably be lower when it comes back. Or you can recertify your income and jump onto a different payment plan. Probably will go up, but you can start making those qualifying payments immediately. I think the other things to think about, like try to file all of your paperwork in a timely manner. Employment certification, income driven repayment plans when you have to do that, and then be prepared for it not to be processed in a timely manner. It's a mess right now. Like it's an absolute mess. I think everyone that I am working with that has filed paperwork has not had it processed. Like, and for a while there, they weren't even allowing people to file paperwork, but now it's back open. Like you can do employment certification, you can apply for a new income-driven payment plan. You're just going to have to be patient and persistent. And the persistent part comes in, especially when you're like at that 120 and you're like trying to have your loans forgiven. I have a handful of clients who applied late last year, early this year for loan forgiveness, and they're just waiting. They're just waiting. And that's all that's happening. Like and if you try to call, you're on hold for 2 hours and then you talk to someone who has no idea what they're doing. So be patient. Obviously, that's not going to happen every single time, but there's been so many transitions with the student loan servicers even. So it's not even like the switch of administration. Like obviously that affects it. It's also all of these transitions from your loans being here to your loans being over there. And now we have all new employees and maybe these employees are not as familiar with the program, but also things are changing every day. So how are they even supposed to know what the answers to your questions are if it's not clear? So just try to be patient. I think you should always have a backup plan for your student loans. If you're pursuing PSLF, awesome. I love that as a plan A for a lot of people, but have a plan B if like your employment situation doesn't work out. Do some math, figure out like if I needed to pay these off the old fashioned way, how much would I have to pay every month if I wanted them to be gone in 10 years and 20 years? Like think about all of those things just so that you're mentally prepared for that if that ever happens. What other like loan forgiveness programs are out there? Can I apply for some of these other primary care grants and things like that? Like who knows how long those will be around, but know what your options are.
And be financially prepared too, because eventually you're going to have to start making payments again.
Oh, for
So
sure.
if you've gotten used
Yes.
to no payments and your living expenses have eaten up that no payment, do you have
Yeah.
room to start making a $3,000 a month payment on your loans? Because it's coming. It might not be for another year, but it's coming. So
Hmm.
live within your means.
Yep.
I've encouraged some people to just simulate that student loan payment by throwing that amount in a brokerage account or their kid's college savings account or,
Yeah.
towards their mortgage. Do
Or
something
you could even
productive
put
with
it
it.
in savings if you know you're going to have to buy back payments later.
Bingo.
Like I'm basically making my payments because I know if I want to buy back later, I'm going to have a chunk of money.
Don't build that expense into your lifestyle just yet. Use it in a productive manner that's going away every month so that when payments do resume, you're in a position to just make a little pivot and start paying the student loans instead of the savings account, the 529, the brokerage account, whatever. But you don't have to be like, oh, shoot, where am I going to come up with this money? I don't have it.
Hmm. Yep.
That's going to happen
It's
to a lot of
coming.
people.
I think it will too. I think it's going to be a little. Whew. Okay. Well, I think in summary, yes, there's a lot of drama, but it is still a good program. Obviously, the nuts and bolts of it are a little messy at the moment. But if that was your plan before, probably makes sense for it to still be the plan now and just do your best to cross your T's and dot your I's and do everything you can to make sure that things are being recorded correctly.
Thanks for listening. See you next time.
Thanks, everyone.